Hi, good morning and welcome everyone. This is Office Hours with AvaTax. I'm Ted Spence. I'm the director of the API team here at Avalara. And just wanted to say thank you for spending a half hour out of your day with us. We have a couple things to talk about today. And what I wanted to do was to start off by saying, let's spend a little bit of time looking at performance tuning for AvaTax. This is actually one of the most common questions that I get. And here with me today is Jeff Meisner from the marketing team.
Morning, Ted.
Jeff, I know you get pestered by people all the time asking about performance.
Yeah, I do. Yep, we get it on social, we get it via email, and your team is usually really good about responding to all those questions.
Well, thanks. You sure know the right way to butter up a guy. But anyways, what do we do? How do we verify that our API is doing a good job? Well, we've actually investigated a lot of different ways to look at the performance of our API. And one of the most immediate things you can do is you can visit the developer site and you can try out AvaTax and you can just experiment with performance. So if I go over here to the API reference, let's see right here. I'm going to check out the Create Transaction API. If you scroll into the developer site, and you click Try It Now, you have a little button called Fill with Sample Data, and you can submit it. You get a response. Less than half a second.
Pretty
I don't know exactly how fast it is, but it's tolerably fast. So the problem is that, just using that I guess it's an anecdote. That's the thing. An anecdote is singular, whereas data is plural. So if you just have one experience, you can't really tell a lot from it, can you? So really, the key thing people ask me is, hey, look, this is my experience. Am I normal? Is everything working correctly? So, we experimented with this a little bit, and I got involved in, for the past couple of years, I've been on a large number of investigations from people who have asked me about this kind of performance tuning. And I looked at it and I said, well, how can I come up with a good solution for this? Well, one thing that I can do is I can give you documentation about best practices. So if you're interested, click up here into the API section and select the AvaTax Developer Guide. There's a whole lot of good advice, connectivity, troubleshooting information here. All of this can help you verify that your connection to AvaTax is as good as possible. And there's a whole lot of stuff down here. We have information here about IP address, hard coding, DNS caching.
Yeah, the dev guide is really, really thorough.
Yeah, but at the same time, I don't think anyone's going to read through all of this, are they?
No, probably not.
That's really the challenge is we want to make the content out there available and useful for you, but we know that maybe you don't have an unlimited amount of time to research this stuff.
Yeah, I think the dev guide is really well organized, though, so I think it's easy to navigate and for people to find the information they need.
Well, the other thing is documentation is only as good as the person reading it. So the other thing we want to do is we want to give you a tool to explore performance. So this was actually one of the big realizations that I had a while back, which is that we just need a way to double check things. The actual problem that caused me to create it was that I was on the phone with a customer, and the customer was saying, all of our API calls take 700 milliseconds. There's no way this is not acceptable. And I said, well, let's try to figure this out. Because then I went on the server side, and I have log information about all of our API calls. I can tell exactly how long each API call took on our server side. But what I was seeing was totally different than what he was seeing. It's kind of like a Rashomon situation, right?
Yeah. How do you know whose side the issue is really on?
Well, and the answer is maybe it's not on either side. Maybe it's somewhere in between.
Yeah.
So part of what I tell people is that there's 3 parties involved in the performance of AvaTax. There's my server, there's your client application, and then there's the network in between us. And you can't entirely control it, and I can't entirely control it, but we can sort of influence it. So I even had one customer call me up when a backhoe dug up their internet connection.
Oh my God.
Isn't that terrible? Like how are you supposed to deal with that? your internet connection goes down, and the only thing you can do is like call up the construction facility and get them to send out new fiber.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that's pretty insane. Okay, so what do we do? Well, let's take a look. I wrote a blog post a while ago, and if you're not familiar with this, check out the Avalara developer blog. There's a lot of good information here. We publish a whole lot of how-to articles, and every so often, you'll see something that's really interesting or really useful.
I hope it's more than every so often.
Well, I mean, at the moment, we're publishing maybe 3 or 4 blog posts a month, and we spend a little bit too much time fine-tuning them, perhaps. So we're always trying to adjust the quality and the frequency of our blog posts. With that, I think there is, just a little bit farther back, I think there is a performance tuning blog post that I wrote. There we go. So this blog post right here talks about some of the key things that you can check. And these are some obvious things you can look at. First of all, check to see if HTTP Keep Alive is enabled. You can save a lot of performance by using HTTP Keep Alive, but on the other hand, you also have to be careful if you're reusing a connection too many times. Do you need to close it periodically? SSL security negotiation can take 40 milliseconds, it can take longer. So all of these different questions, they can all influence the performance of AvaTax. So the final thing that I did is I said, look, we absolutely need a program that you can use to test this. This was the very first version of my AvaTax Connect program. And what I did is I said, I'm going to measure all 3 components of the performance of AvaTax. Well, it's gotten a little bit better since then, so I want to show you the latest about this program and talk to you a little bit about how it works. If you're interested, all of the source code for this program is publicly available. It's open source. It's entirely free for you to use. So I'm going to show you very quickly. This is, oops, wrong link. I'll put this in the chat window here, if I can find the chat window properly. This is the source code for the AvaTax Connect program. It's written in C#, which happens to be my programming language of choice. And what it does is it runs and it continually contacts AvaTax for a tax determination over and over and over and over again. And then it just gives you a measurement of what did the server do, what did the client do, and what did the network do. So I've got it loaded up here. I'm going to go ahead and run it. Let's see what it produces for me. What it's doing right now is it's contacting this server. Mm-hmm. This is one of our quality assurance servers. It looks like this server, what's going on my server side? Looks like our QA server is really overloaded right now. That's a pretty normal situation. We're constantly testing things and we're constantly experimenting with load. In this particular circumstance, you could say this Avalara test server is completely overloaded. Equally well, you also see here is the amount of time that the network took. This is the difference between the processing time and the server-side time. So let me go ahead and I'm going to turn off my screen for just a moment. I'm going to switch to a public AvaTax server, and I'm going to get you a different performance number from a server that is healthy. And the reason that we're showing this to you is because we really want you to know exactly what it is. We really want to show you exactly what AvaTax does and how it works. So here, I'm now running against a production server, and all of a sudden you can see the amazing difference.
Oh, wow,
the server responses are coming back in 60, 70, 80 milliseconds.
What's standard, Ted? What's a good
standard? Oh, boy, am I glad you asked that question. That's actually a really hard question to answer. The biggest problem is standard is different for everyone. Mm-hmm. So the performance of AvaTax depends on the complexity of your tax calculations. What we have as an example right here is that I'm using one thread to create a single line sales order. Mm-hmm. That's a pretty simplified calculation step. That's about as simple as it's going to get. If we wanted to, we could switch to a larger number of tax lines. We could switch to more complexity. We could switch to different addresses. Simulating these things requires guessing or trying to research to figure out what is happening and what your service uses. So, sorry, are you flagging me down to a question from the customer? I would like to just pause very quickly, just to remind you that this is an interactive Q&A. We would like to open this up to all of your questions. Jeff here is volunteering to do the thankless work of checking the messages. If you have a question, just please put it in the chat channel and Jeff will bring it up.
Great. Okay. First question is, I'm trying to run a trace route to Avalara servers. Can one of your network engineers help me check my routing?
Okay, so that's a little bit tricky. What I'd like to point out is that traceroute is a very common debugging process. Go ahead. If I traceroute to google.com, you're going to get a whole lot of information like this, and then sooner or later, traceroute is just going to halt. Why is that?
I don't know. You tell me, Ted.
Gosh, Jeff, I'm glad you asked that. Okay, so the problem is that traceroute uses a technique called ICMP, or ping, to communicate across servers. ICMP is also one of the most common methods of denial of service attacks. So if you've heard stories in the news about, the FBI is asking people to reset their Wi-Fi routers,
yep.
The problem is that hackers will try to break into your home Wi-Fi, and they will try to set it up so that on demand, they generate a large number of ICMP requests to a business that's public. And then what they do is they contact the business and say, if you don't send us 10 Bitcoins, we'll keep DDoSing your site. And they try to hold you hostage. And that's one of the really tricky things that goes on in the internet right now. Why am I telling you this? It's because Avalara has denial of service protection integrated into our infrastructure. So the question that you asked was, can one of your engineers help me with my traceroute? The answer is we don't really support traceroute as a method of diagnosing performance. And the reason is because we are constantly adjusting and changing our routes in order to ensure that denial of service attacks do not affect the performance of your tax calculation.
Gotcha.
When you use traceroute to contact us, we detect that you're using that and we route it to an entirely different direction. So you will see unpredictable results when you attempt to contact AvaTax. Every so often, I know that sometimes network engineers do use it, but what I would encourage you to do is don't use this. Go ahead and download the AvaTax Connect program and run that and simulate that.
Where can they find the AvaTax Connect program?
AvaTax Connect is published in this blog post, and the source code is also available here. So I'll go ahead and put this in the chat channel as well, just so you can get this. That's the direct program. And we also have this blog post right here, which refers to the story of how to use it. There we go. So those things are all shared and available to you. I would love to hear from anyone who's running this and is, getting successful results. The key thing that you'll notice is in this output, you're going to see that AvaTax Connect breaks out the server side, the network side, and the client side of all of your performance metrics. So what's happening right here is that you are experiencing overall 225 milliseconds of network latency. What you're noticing is that out of those 225 milliseconds, the server was operating for 94 milliseconds. So that means in between you and the client, there were 128 milliseconds of performance metrics that are governing the way this works.
Okay.
So we're breaking this down for you, and we're trying to give you information about how much time is being spent in the net. Another key thing to think about is when you see this performance, it's worth running it on your desktop computer at home. And the reason for that is because your desktop computer at home runs on a consumer-grade network that does not have firewalls, load balancing, does not have multipath routes. And what's interesting is every once in a while, I encounter a customer or partner who has a network router configuration that slows down AvaTax. And by running this at home, if you run this on your home computer, you can sometimes see, hey, wait a minute. If I run this outside of my office network, the performance characteristics change. And that can sometimes help you realize when there are performance issues that are affecting your office network. So it's worth doing that. Like, you can run this program anywhere. You can get a baseline at your home. You can get a baseline at your office. You can get a baseline using Wi-Fi tethering to your mobile phone. And all of those will give you interesting bits of information that you can then take back to your network engineer to ask them to help investigate.
Good information. Are you ready for another question?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. The next question is, where are Avalara's servers located? Isn't that like state secret?
Yeah, you know, the thing that I would say is that I kind of know where our servers are now, but I try to stay out of that. My team writes the code. My team builds the API, and we build the developer tools. But I don't have a hand in the day-to-day server operation. The team that manages our infrastructure is a 24/7 team. Those guys are getting paged at 3 a.m. They're constantly, looking at, problems with overseas routing and network behavior and all sorts of different continents.
So lots of monitoring and lots of redundancies, I'm guessing.
Yeah. So what I can tell you is right now, Avalara's servers are on the West Coast. I believe they are in data centers in the Pacific Northwest. And I know at least some of them are in the AWS infrastructure in Oregon. I believe that's where it's located. However, they're constantly tinkering with this. And we have a mixed environment, including some physical servers, some virtual servers, some cloud servers, and some redundant third-party servers. So there's a lot of stuff going on.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Not being a developer myself, does geographical proximity of between Avalara and where our servers are located have any impact on latency, or is that a non-factor?
It totally does. Last I checked, actually, I'm going to go ahead and Google this for you. This is like the cardinal rule of demos. Never Google something because you have no idea what you're going to find. But I'm going to Google speed of light from Chicago to LA. Let's do Oregon. Oh, gee, red light cameras in Oregon? All right, see, this is the problem. You don't do this sort of stuff in demos. Let this be a lesson to me. The thing is that the speed of light will actually give you information about how far light can go you can travel 186 miles per millisecond. So if there is absolutely nothing in between you and the target server, you can transit 186 miles in a millisecond. So that means if you're 1,860 miles away, it'll take you 10 milliseconds to get there. So I think the width of the United States is somewhere around 3,000 miles, something like that. So you got to figure out, all right, there's a certain inescapable limit. If you're on the East Coast and you're talking to AvaTax, you're going to have a certain amount of delay. And part of what I know our engineers are hard at work on is coming up with geographical distribution for AvaTax in order to continue to push down latency for everyone.
Yeah.
But we saw in our quick test here, we saw 40 to 100 milliseconds of network latency. It's worth mentioning that this is not just the speed of light latency, it's also the amount of data going back and forth.
Right.
So another thing that we're constantly investigating is how can we better structure our data to give you answers faster. So we'll be investigating that, we'll be digging into it, we'll constantly tune that.
Great, thanks for the answer.
Yeah, is that another question you're fighting?
Yeah, there's another question, let's see. Well, this is kind of related to what we were just talking about. Where are Avalara's servers located? Oh, I'm sorry, no, we just asked that one. How many servers does AvaTax use, and how are they set up?
Oh boy. Again, the main thing that I can say there is that we're constantly adjusting it. We see an amazing amount of traffic in AvaTax, and that amazing amount of traffic is somewhere around 4 to 5 times higher during the holiday buying season. And right now, I mean, like, it's June. We're already 6 months into our work to prepare for the holiday buying season for 2018.
What about on a monthly basis, Ted? Because there's certain times of the month when businesses have to file their sales tax information. Does it slow down any particular time of the month?
I do see some increase in usage, but it's not as much as you'd think. My experience so far is that a lot of customers start working on their monthly sales tax reporting between the 1st and the 15th of the month. Usually around the 9th or the 10th, it starts to slow down.
Mm-hmm.
I think at that point, most people have closed out their books for the month.
Yep.
They're starting to prepare their sales tax filings, and they're ready to go. So I do see a slightly elevated usage pattern for the first week to 2 weeks of the month.
Yep.
But it's not enough that would significantly change things. To get back to your original question, Mr. or Mrs. Customer here, how many servers do we have? I think it's under 100, but it's more than 20. And I don't know exactly because it will change.
Right.
In general, during a deployment, what we will actually do is we will actually create a whole bunch of new virtual servers, completely new virtual servers. And so let's say we've got 30 or 40 machines running AvaTax at that point. We will create 30 or 40 new ones. We will launch the new software on it. We'll do basic tests against them, and then they will be swapped into the load balancer to take over from the old ones. So it's actually a very clever deployment process, and it really builds off of the idea that servers are disposable things.
Right.
I'm sure the poor servers don't like being careened to their doom every month after they get deployed, but they're just ones and zeros.
Yeah.
That has never come back to haunt us, and there's definitely not an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie where the machines come back and get revenge. So anyways, with all of that said, the answer to number of servers is it depends, it changes, and we're constantly tinkering with it. So I hope that helps you, but I'm not sure it's exactly the best answer you were hoping for.
Cool, we got one more question.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Okay, this is actually a really good question, I think, because it impacts everything that a customer does. Should I retry a tax call if it times out?
Well, should you? Any kind of question that's like should, I should stay neutral in this. I should tell you that it depends. Because I've talked to customers for whom retries are the right thing to do, and I've talked to other customers for whom retries are the wrong thing to do.
What are the customer's options?
Well, actually, let's go ahead and let's swap over to the developer guide. The AvaTax developer guide has a chapter called Calculating Tax Offline that talks specifically about this decision. And check it out. We actually have a section called Retry or Fallback.
Right.
Really, the two choices that you have are, if you retry, how do you make sure that you don't accidentally calculate tax twice and double up on your reporting?
Right.
Because that would be bad.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that you don't do that. We gave an API call that's called Create or Adjust. Create or Adjust is really useful for a retry scenario, because if you retry the exact same transaction over again and the original transaction had succeeded for whatever reason, Create or Adjust will automatically update it rather than creating a new one. So that's pretty useful there.
That's a great endpoint, yeah.
So I definitely want to encourage people, if you're thinking about retrying, please use Create or Adjust. If, on the other hand, you decide that you want to fall back, the key thing that you need to think about is when you calculate tax offline, we have a variety of APIs that can give you information about tax rates, and you can use those APIs to cache data offline. But what you'll then have to do is you'll then have to take your offline tax transaction and report it and make it available. And if you under-collected, well, you're probably going to be on the hook to pay a little bit more in sales tax. And if you over-collected, well, then you're going to have to ensure that you remit the correct amount. So there's a secondary process called reconciling your transactions later. And what we do is we use a thing called a tax override. So if you determined offline that you charged $10 of tax on a transaction, you want to eventually reconcile that transaction with AvaTax using a tax amount of $10. And what that tells us is I calculated my tax offline and I determined that the correct amount was $10. I want AvaTax to record this for me, and then in my reporting at the end of the month, I want you to deal with that.
Right.
So at that point, we will then capture that, make sure that your overcollect is correctly remitted.
Cool.
So we have strategies for this, and we want to make sure that you have all of the information necessary to do the best you can with taxes. In my experience, I've been involved in a couple of audit scenarios and a couple of sales tax audits. As long as you can demonstrate to your auditor that you're doing everything the very best way, in general, most of the auditors have been willing to accept the results. So I've never encountered a situation where an auditor is going to throw the books at someone who's clearly trying to do the right thing.
Yep.
The key principle that I always come back to is whatever tax you collect, you must remit, and you should do your best to calculate the correct tax. And I think those principles generally result in good results from auditors.
Totally.
That said, I should mention, since I've talked about audits, Avalara does have a professional services team that does handle audit advice. So you should take a look at this, and if you are involved in an audit or if you need to do voluntary compliance, the professional services team can be a great help to you. I would definitely encourage you to reach out to them. But I hope that everyone who uses AvaTax gets good results and doesn't get any kind of inquiries from auditors. I should also mention, if you're interested in this sort of thing, we have a ton of great stuff coming up next year in Crush 2019 Huntington Beach. So Crush 2019 is going to be about a year from now, and it's a ton of fun conference, as fun as tax can be. By the way, Jeff, do we have another question? I think I just saw one of the little highlights come up.
1 second, yeah.
So anyways, we'd love to meet you all next year, and we have a lot of sessions talking about that.
Yeah, actually, Wendy Leonard, who is an Avalarian, says that the PS team, the professional services team, actually no longer offers audit support services.
Oh, well, that's interesting. We should update our documentation.
Definitely.
All right, well, that's a good capture.
Thanks,
thank you,
Wendy.
Wendy. In the meantime, getting back to our overall theme for today, performance tuning is really a critical thing that we want to make sure everyone has knowledge about, but this calculating tax offline chapter is the best documentation we have available, and we think it's a pretty good place to start. It's useful in a variety of situations. It will help you in performance tuning. It will help you with intermittent connections. It will help you when the backhoe cuts your internet pipe for whatever reason. So it's a pretty useful set of documentation, and we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, great session. Such an important topic, too. And I'd just like to remind everyone that we do office hours every week, 10 a.m. on Tuesday. And it looks like Ted is heading over to our awesome developer community forums. Ted, you want to tell the audience a little bit about that?
Yeah, our main purpose here is if you don't get all of your questions answered today in our webinar, we have teams available that pay attention to all of your comments on the Avalara community forums, and we'd love to hear from you. If you go ahead and post a question on this forum, we will make sure that somebody reads it and gets you a response. However, if you do need personal advice, if you do need like actual direct one-on-one advice, I would encourage you to just get directly on the phone with us. Thank you all for spending a half hour with us, and we really hope to see you all next week, this same time, for developer office hours. You can always sign up for our webinars in advance, and thank you all for your time.
Thanks, Ted.
Take care, everyone.